Ball joint time. The tops are screw in. The bottom, which are not here right now, are press in. You have to get the special ball joint socket. This is the large ball joint. It is a 2 9/64. Pretty obvious. Click it down on there. Sometimes you got to clean around it so that it'll fit on it. 3/4 inch drive, breaker bar, and I'm going to tell you right now, that ain't going to do it. So I got this big piece of pipe. It's my cheater bar. See, if I try it alone, it just bounces on you. I put it on there until it goes all the way up as far as it'll go. Make sure you got your footing, don't fall down or get hurt. There we go. Okay, so you saw us strong arm those upper ball joints out of the control arms, and I went ahead and had some other things taken care of, like the lower control arms and having the bushings pressed in. The old ones popped out, new ones pressed in. Have the old ball joints pressed out and the new ones pressed in. There's a shop down here that doesn't use those ridiculous shop hour costs, and it was still over $100, but much cheaper than you would have had it the typical shop. So if you have a place like that in your community, a small place that does alignments or machine anything, take it to them, because you're going to give them business and you might get off a lot cheaper. So I'm going to show you what we got here. So here's the two control arms with the lowers, and they're pretty much ready to go. I will finish them out a little bit more. I clean most of the gack off of them and stuff like that, but I'm going to tape these ball joints up so they don't get dirt inside of them. And then I'm going to go ahead and just give them a quick wire wheel, and we'll have them ready for paint. You could do that any way you want. You can take them all out. I would probably prefer or recommend that, to take them out, but I'm trying to get some time, not wasting too much time, because I could have taken to them, gotten them back, and then painted them, and then took them back in. But so we can work around it. It's not a rotisserie restoration or anything like that. This will do. This will be good enough. These pads back here, these are the clamps that hold the strut rods in. Those were really gacked up. They're almost ready. The strut rods themselves, the washers and nuts, and then the springs have mostly been cleaned up. I'm going to go over them a little bit. One of our spindles right here, that's the one that we already had. Here's the one we got from our buddy Steven, one of our subscribers, and it's the opposite side, so I'm going to clean that one up, tape the spindle skein off, and then paint the rest of it. And then these was pretty crusty here. The brake line holders, I dipped them in acid and then neutralized them really good, and they are pretty much ready to paint. Other than this, we're going to clean up the upper control arms, which are currently on the van. We'll just work around the hinge on that type of deal and paint them black. All this stuff will mostly be black. I think I'll paint the clamps for the strut rods like a cast iron color, and then the washers and nuts for the strut rods the same cast iron color. So this is what we need to get done. Everything else, to my knowledge, is pretty much ready to go. The calipers, the holders, and yeah, all that kind of stuff. So let's just move forward from there. All right, so we've been over here doing a little bit of acid, and these came out really nice, and you can kind of see how good of a job you do cleaning all the little specks and grease and gunk off of it. I had a little spot there, and it was hiding some rust underneath it, and I saw it when you get everything cleaned up and nice and clear and everything here, and no big deal on that. But this is, as it was, bare metal. Neutralized it with some heavy baking soda and water, and just brushed it and just saturated it really good. If it had fit in there, I would have done that. If you have a small bucket, that works too. And you'll see the fizz on it. And when the fizz quits and you keep putting more on, it quits fizzing up, then you've pretty much neutralized all the acid, the muriatic acid. So these are ready to, I'm going to dry them off real good, probably with the torch, and then spray them with the cast iron paint, which it should look not too much different than they are now. It just keeps them from rusting anymore. Alright, we've got all this other stuff cleaned up, and well, it's time to get down to business of getting all this cleaned up in here. And my main area that I really want to focus on is this control arm, because that's where everything anchors in, you know, our ball joint. So we want to at least get as much as this we can get cleaned up as, you know, reasonable. I'm not going to take it off. Hopefully I won't have to. It looks like the bushings, although they're old, it doesn't seem to be completely froze. So that's a good thing. But I'll probably take a wire wheel to some of this, and as well as this frame area, we'll try to avoid, you know, we've left this off of the hanger. We took the clip off of it so we can move it around and work around it. So those will be the gloss black like a lot of the other components we've been doing. And I'll probably just do the black through here. Although there was a body color, but I'm not really too concerned about that. Yeah, so I'll get started on this. We'll try to hit the other side as well. And then it'll be time to put things back together. Yay! Got all this cleaned up really pretty good. I mean, I was gonna say really good, but it's kind of good. We don't have to get too excessive with this. I'm not doing a super duper restoration on it, and a lot of stuff is really thick. This frame is really thick, really solid, so I'm not really offended by having, you know, some dirt and some little spots like this. But if you're just taking a flash look at it like this, and then you look away, or you kind of gander at it for a few seconds, we're going to cover what you see there. So I blew everything out. I scraped, I wire wheeled, I wire brushed. I had the toothbrush wire and some sandpaper, 80 grit, and just kind of went to town and, you know, knocked off any heavy scale. Most of that was up here. Some was on this K-frame down here. And from there, I blew everything out. You saw that, and then I just took the 80 grit and went over it again to give it a good scuff, because your wire wheel kind of does a slick job. It might tear off the paint, which is good, or the rust, but then it leaves it kind of slick. So I went over it with some 80 grit, just scuffed it up really good, went back up here and did it, and blew it out again. So now I'm going to wipe everything down with wax and grease remover, and then that way, once it dries, I'm going to take our encapsulator and hit the top of this frame rail, down the side, down here where the strut rod fits in. I cleaned all that up in there, and just whatever's presentable along through here, and this. So I'm gonna get to that, and then we'll jump over to the other side. And oh, one thing, right here, this is where your ball joint screws in. This one screws in, doesn't press in. So we have a little bit of rust on the threads, but it's not bad rust, just, you know, a little bit of moisture getting in there. So I made sure to not get in there and gouge anything. I took the small wire brush and just kind of cleaned it out. when we go to put the ball joint in, we'll put a little bit of grease in there, and try your best not to cross thread anything, because they are actually bad about cross threading on these. So they have a real shallow thread. It's not like a real deep like a typical bolt would. So yeah, I'm gonna jump through here, clean this up, and we'll get some paint on it. And now we're gonna go into this side. This has a little bit more pitting going on the frame rail because of the battery that sits up above here. And so it did some corrosive damage to this area, but it's not enough to be thin, really. It just needs need to seal it up and protect it from any further damage, and watch our battery, make sure it doesn't blow up or leak on anything. Everything back here is pretty much the same. Got all the dirt daubers out of there, like pretty much like on the other side. Clean this up, lift it up a little bit, get under there, and yeah, we'll hit some encapsulator on it and some black paint, and hopefully be ready for tomorrow to put all the other stuff on. So just some red grease, wheel bearing. Not a lot, just enough to kind of give it a little bit of a coat. And I'll move the camera in here so you can see what we've done. Okay, so you can see a little bit of the red tint in there. That's just the grease, not a lot, just a little bit. You ultimately see just the steel. And here's your ball joint here. And you see it's got these kind of odd shallow threads on it, and that's why it's so easy to cross thread them. So this one's already got the bushing on it, and so just drop her down in there, let it kind of find itself, and you should be able to just turn it a little bit. And that went in pretty good there, like that. And just, you can usually eyeball it, go all the way around it if it doesn't look like it's crooked or anything. Now the shape of the arm kind of is odd itself, so you have to make sure you're on the plane with this right here. And once you get it where you need it, like we are there, then you'll have your special ball joint socket. This one's a 3/4 drive, 4-sided deal, and it's for the large style. There's a small one, but this is the large one, so fit on there like so. Okay, and then we get Bertha here, breaker bar, super chrome dome, and it's gonna need a cheater bar on it, I'll tell you that. If it's like the other side, you know, you might get lucky and have one just a little looser tolerance, but yeah. So we'll just do this until it gets into the tight area, and then we'll have to get crazy. Don't hurt yourself. Okay, so we got it in. Good news was I didn't have to use the cheater bar. The other side, when I got down to the last 1/8 of an inch or so, I had to get in the cheater bar and spin it in. This one, a lot of effort, yes. You can probably tell by my breathing, but we're nice and flush. It goes to where it stops, and then we'll just put the grease fitting on it, and then get the nut loose, and then we'll start doing all the underpinnings here for the control arm, strut arm, or the strut rod, and all the brake line attachment stuff, all that fun kind of situation. So okay, so we have one little issue we have to address before we go mounting the control arm into place. And if you look right here on the passenger side, I put a lot of this together. You have this rubber bump stop, so that if you bottom out, it'll hit up here, and it's on a little metal anchor. It's probably vulcanized to the surface and has a stud that goes through the metal plate. Well, here is our rubber piece, and it's actually really good shape. It just has come disconnected from the little platform that mounted right here, and that platform is right here, and I actually have it jammed in here right now. I'm gonna do something, but I'll tell you that in a second. But this is completely rotted on one side, and it was thin, and that's why it's probably why it separated from here, and it went underneath there like that. The stud protrudes through here, and this is where your strut rod situation mounts underneath, like there, and you won't be able to access it. Even though there is a hole in the control arm, it's not lined up properly, so you have to address it while it's off. So I was looking for a piece of steel that was equivalent to this as it was originally, and I found this, and it happened to be from the van originally. It's one of the old seat mounting pedestals, and you can see it's in pretty rough shape. I just had them thrown out back, and I actually pulled this piece from right here. I already had the hole in it, the right thickness, the right plane, and I just bent this little edge over. That's where it locks over on this part here. So this leads me to just cleaning it up, and then what I want to do is get this stud removed. It's probably like a electric welded or kind of mate welded on there. So I'm just kind of bevel away with the cutting wheel this piece to where I have just the stud, and you can see there's the head of it, and then I will poke it through here, and you'll see I might have to either elongate that hole or position it to where it sits in this upper section, so to speak. And so I'm going to do that, and before I mount all that together, or actually, let's see, I can mount the stud in here, but then I'll have to figure a way to mount this, and I might clean this up a little bit here and see if I can use some maybe even some panel bond and put a nice little square on there and glue it in that way. Worst comes to worst, I can run a screw through it, drill another little hole, run a screw through it. So okay, so we have it in the clamp, in the jaws, in the vise. Okay, I used panel bond from the piece that I made to the rubber. I welded the stud on top of the plate, and then that's where the glue's in between there. And I just used regular old panel bond. I made sure that the metal part was clean, raw metal, and obviously this will be rubber, so we'll see how well it does. Panel bond works ideally between two metal surfaces that are with no paint, but this is one metal surface and then rubber, which was cleaned up really well, and then I just compressed it like you would wood glue and wood, just to get a nice tight bond. So I've got some decent pressure on it there. We're gonna let it set for a couple hours or so, and then we'll pull it off and use it, and then see how it goes. Okay, so now that we have the upper ball joint in place, I'm gonna start doing the lower stuff here. And this turned out pretty good. The panel bond held okay. I think it seems a little flimsy, so I drilled 2 holes in the metal plate underneath it and ran 2 flathead screws in it, countersunk it so that they would lay flat, and that seems to be pretty sufficient there. This is loosely bolted together. There's two main bolts and there's a large, like a kingpin bolt right here. And I've noticed on the other side, I don't fool with these coil type situations very much, but you leave this all a little loose but have it somewhat bolted together. That way you could get your couple of points that are at different angles lined up, and then we'll have to set the spring in there, stuff like that. I do like to put just a little bit of grease, very little, in the pocket for the spring, and can kind of resist any water, and maybe if it wants to creak around it, it'll keep it from doing that. So here's the other end of the strip.
Cash in on cool deals now at Shanks Bloomington's Beat the Heat sale. You'll find Plymouth Reliant or Dodge Aries for as low as $86.55. That includes air conditioning, automatic transmission, plus power steering and brakes. If it's a truck you need, take the plunge into a Ram 50, D100, D250, or D350, still at 8.8% APR financing. Plus 8.8 is still available on Lancer and LeBaron GTS. Hurry, our Beat the Heat summer sale is going on now at Shanks Chrysler, Plymouth, Dodge, and Dodge Trucks at 1700 West 3rd in Bloomington.
We got our buddy Sam with us. Sam used to run around with us back when we had the muscle cars, and we might get him to speak up a little bit about some of that. But we got the control arm here, the strut rod, and we have the spring setting in here. We have a jack under here, and that's just sometimes a iffy area because the spring has a little bit of tension on it, and you don't want it to pop out, this thing fail, and then you have, a flying spring. So what I'm going to do is take our shock and we're going to slip it up through the control arm and mount it. That way, if it does decide to unanchor itself, the shock will actually hold it, so it'll kind of give us a little bit of a safety thing in the meantime. Now, I started to put this in here with the clamp on it, all right, the strut rod clamp. But you have a couple points that need to anchor, and it was back here. It wouldn't fit into the right spot so that the bolt could go through, and then your spring. So I went ahead and disconnected that and left the strut rod is actually completely loose. So we'll just lay it aside, and you actually have to take and crank the bolt down or the nut on it so that it draws it in, so that the holes line up. So it's another little thing you got to do. Okay, so we're going to put the shock up in here. We've got the bushing on it, the washer, a little bit of grease. Get a couple threads on it, we should be good there. Just like that. And then I will grab, well, that'll be good for the moment because it's holding through here, and then we'll run the bolts into that to secure that here in a bit. In the meantime, one thing we got to do, we got to run the strut rod in, make sure it's clean. And like I said, this needs to move about 5/8 of an inch for it to line up, for this hole to line up with the hole here. A lot of it's relying on your compression of these bushings for it to do so. So when you start turning that, it's going to want to turn the whole brace. You don't want to just flip around here like that. So you can run a pin or a clamp and hold it to the control arm, or put it in there, and it'll keep it from turning once it gets to a certain point. So we're going to do that, and we'll jump back on here and get it set. Okay, so we got this thing tightened down back here to where it drawed it that way. We was able to drop the bolt in there. We cranked the jack up a little bit, got the nut underneath, and we went ahead and put the other two bolts in. So we are pretty secure. I will go ahead and get this where it's finger tight on all three of these bolts, and then we can let the jack out. So I also have the nut on the control arm bolt back here, so that it doesn't happen to slip out while we're dropping it and have a big catastrophe there. And one thing I did when I was trying to keep this from turning was I took a big extension, 1/2 inch extension. I dropped it in through here, and it also went through the control arm. That way when I went to crank it, it held it tight like that, and it kept it from turning. So we got it close, and we was able to drop in, pulled it out, drop the bolts in, and we're good there. So we'll have to go ahead and tighten this down when we get everything settled. So Sam, you want to go ahead and drop that? There we go. And our shock moved over. We'll have to put the bolts in that, no big deal. And we're pretty good here. Now, when we go put the spindle on, we'll have to jack it up again, but I just want to get everything kind of established here, and then we'll go forward. The last thing you want to do is tighten the control arm hinge bolt. You want to get the pressure of the car or the vehicle back on its wheels, because if you tighten it now and then you set it down, the pressure is going to push up, and it's going to take the rubber bushings and twist them, and then that's going to put premature wear on it. So you want to do that when you get it all set back down on all fours. So, all right, we got everything all anchored down here, and it's time for the spindle. But the spindle relies on this. It looks like a ball joint if you're dealing with a lot of the cars. I actually have the ball joint built in here, but that's not what this is. The ball joint separate, so it's just like a tie rod connection piece. So it's got kind of one way to go. It's got the wider end here. That's how you know it ain't, because it ain't gonna go upside down. All right, so it go on that way, and then we have our castle nut. We're gonna fit it to where it's just snug, and then it'll press fit it later. And so we'll kind of start with that, and then this will bolt to this. We'll fit it into this piece here. I got my bolts, which will hold to the tie rod extension here. So we'll get these ready, and it'll go through like that, right? So meaning the head will be on the inside because of the shallowness, because otherwise it could hit your rotor, and you don't want that. Okay, so they are a pretty snug fit. Both of them go in there, and it should just slip through there, and we will just get these on finger tight. Lift this guy up, and you mind cranking that up until it kind of clears this. You got a washer on this one, and then your castle nut there. Make sure this is loose all the way in. Make sure you help it fit. Right there, dude. Thank you. And then we get it kind of run on there. There you go. Sometimes it's hard to take a thread. So we'll get into this. Basically tighten all this stuff down. These two, the castle nut for the ball joint, that'll press fit it, and then we're gonna tighten this castle nut and press fit the top one here, and then we'll go from there. All right, so I jumped ahead a little bit here. We've got the spindle on it, tightened everything down, these bolts, and both of the castle nuts on the ball joints. I went ahead and put the caliper adapter on here. We used some Loctite on the threads there, and I put the shield back on here, and it just takes 3 screws. So one thing I can do, I can drop this jack out from under here, and we can get ahead with building the rest of this out. So I'll have to do the rotors. They're brand new rotors, so we'll have to grease everything, put the new bearing in, the new seal, and then it'll be ready to go on here with all the other hardware. So we'll get into that, drop this jack out, and get going on that. So I was actually gonna end the video because I didn't have my master cylinder yet, and you have to replace the master cylinder usually when you go from drum to disc because of the partition, the proportion of the cylinder itself. So drums are usually 50-50. These are usually like a 75% to 25, roughly. So I put it here on the vise and did our bench bleed. I actually had to change one of these fittings on the back part here, the large area, because I went through and got the front bled, but this one just kept producing bubbles and even bigger bubbles. So I had to re-bleed it, and I'm pretty much ready. And we have very solid, no bubble lines now. And we're in pretty good shape. And again, the 318 / small block Chrysler push rod comes in handy again. Got that rounded in. I just put it in a socket on a wrench so you can just push it in there real good. And yeah, so we'll get the lid on this, get it installed on the van. I've got the old one off already, and I opened it up and it was kind of gunky inside, so even if it was the right one, we probably had to clean it out, but I put it back in the parts bin, so we'll have a rebuilder for later for either this or something else or whatever. It'll be handy for parts. So. This unit is a lot taller than the other one, but it's not so tall that you can't access it at all. It is a very tight fit up here. You can still take the bail loose and get the cap off and see right down in there. This is a lot of space here, but it will work. It is made for one of these, so we're good to go on that. Master cylinder is in. Brakes are bled. Pretty uneventful, so I didn't show you any of that. Spent about 45 minutes doing all of that, going around and going around and going around. We do have brakes, and I was able to start it, put it in gear, and able to stop the backs, okay, the rear wheels. My tie rod situation up front is dicey because the outer tie rods, one of them stripped, trying to put it back together. So, and the other one's a little looser than I like, so I've decided I'll just go ahead and replace those two. And so I'm going to order those tonight, and then we can get it where the front wheel's straight, set it down, and see how it stops. All that good stuff. More I'm thinking about actually changing the gears out in that rear end. I know, bad timing, right? Since we had all that part a while back. But I have access to some gears, some units, all that sort of thing. So I might go ahead and swap that out and just be done with that. So, yeah. So we got brakes on, disc brakes front, got the old drums in the rear. Looks like we're in a good spot. I think after this, we're going to go get a windshield, have that put in, and weather strip up here in the front doors. We'll work our way back, and probably while some of that's going on, the rear end will come out, get that set up. Too bad it's not an 8 3/4 in that case, because then you can just take the chunk out, but neither here nor there. But anyways, thanks for coming to the Hoosier Garage, watching the disc brake swap. And if you've been watching for a long time, thanks for following along. If you're new, welcome. Thanks for coming aboard. We're trying to get to, I think, 700 subscribers right now. That'd be a good spot to get. And tell your friends about us. Tell everybody. We got some cool merchandise right down below the title. Teespring. We got shirts, decals, some fun stuff like that. All original artwork by me. So if you want to support the channel, support us that way. And by watching videos, and thanks for coming to the Hoosier Garage. Take care.